Hello and welcome to episode 93 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. On the show today, Sarah Says will be back to wrap up her 3-episode conversation about the Haunted Mansion. In episode 91, the two of us went over some Haunted Mansion poll questions that we asked all of you on Twitter. Last week, Sarah started sharing a lot of the history and backstory of the popular attraction. Today, she will go over the rest of the storyline for the ride. The holidays are here, especially as far as Disney is concerned, so I wanted to let you know about something very cool happening. Disney is teaming up with Toys for Tots. You can make donations to Toys for Tots at shopdisney.com, but there are also places where all of us can drop off toys for children. I'm going to read this right off the Disney Parks blog so that I have all the details correct. At Downtown Disney District at the Disneyland Resort, collection bins will be located at the World of Disney store, Star Wars Trading Post, and the hotels of the Disneyland Resort. Guests and cast members can also participate from December 10th through December 11th of the year from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, when U.S. Marines will be on hand near the Downtown Disney Live stage to accept donations. At Disney Springs in Walt Disney World Resort, collection bins are located at the World of Disney store, Marketplace Co-op, Star Wars Galactic Outpost, and the Disney Springs Welcome Center. Walt Disney World Resort cast members will also be joining the fun, collecting toys in backstage locations across the resort all season long and participating in Disney Volunteers, with the EARS in all capitals because Disney loves their puns. Opportunities at local Toys for Tots warehouses for children and families in Orange, Osceola, and Seminole counties. If you can't get to any of the Disney resorts, at most Disney outlet locations and Disney stores, including the Disney store in Times Square, New York, you can also donate new, unwrapped, and unopened toys. On select Saturdays and Sundays through December 11th, Marine representatives will be making visits to help with the toy collection. Call your local Disney outlet or store location for more details. You can also find participating stores by visiting shopdisney.com/store-locator. Just a few things I would like to mention before we get started. I've recently begun to get very active on TikTok, which I'm using as a way to promote this podcast. You can follow me at Tall Guy Talks Travel. You can catch me on Twitter at Rick_ear and on Instagram at Rick Doherty TGTT. If you're wondering, you spell Doherty Dougherty. Don't forget to find my co-hosts Sarah Says and Marissa on Twitter. Sarah is at Sarah Says 84 and Marissa is at Think Mickey Blog. I have also set the goal of 500 subscribers to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel by the end of the year. Please make sure to hit that subscribe button. It is 100% free. Now it's time to bring Sarah Says back on the show. When we left off last week, Sarah had gotten us onto our doom buggies, and we were starting the process of riding through the Haunted Mansion. Pick it up with our next steps, Sarah.
All right, so moving on our tour, we are going to stop at the conservatory. So what this space is the big glass room. Basically, it's big, tall windows with the coffin with someone trying to get out. And this is where we're going to meet our next character. He doesn't have a name. It's just an old man corpse trapped in a coffin. But fun fact, he was voiced by Mr. X. So that was something pretty cool. Originally, he had a different voice where he sounded like a monster, but it was deemed too scary and wanted it more like an older voice coming out of it, like, I shouldn't be in here. Like, I died too young. All right. This, I believe, is another area where you may see the Raven. I'm not going to state everywhere you see the Raven because those diehard fans know it's not really part of the story anymore. So it's just fun to look for. Next, we have, this is one of my favorite areas. It is the corridor of doors. So this is the room you're going through. It's actually deemed one of the scariest parts of the ride by a lot of people because it's dark. The walls are moving. There's a lot of noises. But in the 1980s in Disneyland, there was a live actor in that suit of armor. So not only would you be scared by the doors, but they would jump out and scare you as well. This was taken out because it was too scary and because guests kept hitting the poor cast member in the costume.
All right, I'm going to take another break. I know we're now into November, so things like Halloween Horror Nights and some of these other scare zones don't exist anymore for this year, but next year these things are going to start up again. Don't hit scare actors. Be prepared that people are going to try to scare you, and don't hit scare actors. Don't touch scare actors. That's just something that I want to say. Now, this is never going to affect you again at the Haunted Mansion because this is never coming back. And yes, the guy did have a suit of armor, so at least I hope he was protected a little bit.
But it wasn't. That was the thing, is it wasn't like a legit metal suit of armor. So they kept getting hurt. But it did come back. That is my next point. It came back. It came back twice. For the 30th anniversary of Disneyland in 1999 and the 50th in 2019. But on the 50th, it was only for an after-hours event. So our friend cast member in the suits did come back. I believe from what I read, they did change it up a little bit, so they were not within arm's reach of anyone in doom buggies. I believe the one in 2019, they actually were just kind of marching back and forth, and then they would stop moving, and then all of a sudden they'd just start moving again, but they wouldn't. It was no more jump scares. So that's something pretty fun that they used to do in of course, one of the scariest parts of the ride. All right, as we move on through the corridor of doors is when we end up in our seance circle with Madame Leota. She was voiced by Eleanor Audley, and her face is actually an Imagineer named Leota Toombs. And to this day, I believe it is still her face inside that lovely crystal ball. Something kind of fun is if you've rode any Haunted Mansion, I don't know if Walt Disney World does this new add-on. Before 2005, she sat stationary on the table. Her head was just in a ball on the table. But starting in 2005 in Disneyland, she began to float, which was pretty cool because it was already a pretty hard trick to do so early on of having the projected head in the ball. So that was pretty amazing. Does her head float now in Walt Disney World or no?
It does. And I'm going to throw in another piece of trivia that currently, when they do the Nightmare Before Christmas overlay, which Sarah hates, but
thoroughly dislike.
The face of Madame Leota in that Nightmare Before Christmas overlay is actually played by Kim Irvine, whose mother was the original face of Madame Leota in the Haunted Mansion.
Yes, and the woman who does the voice of the original Madame Leota, Eleanor Audley, she actually is also the voice of Lady Tremaine and Maleficent as well. So if you're going through and you recognize her voice, that is where you hear her from, which is pretty amazing.
So now I believe we are moving to the most popular section of the Haunted Mansion. On our Twitter poll, this was the most iconic scene in the Haunted Mansion, judged by our listeners anyway, and that's the ballroom scene.
Yes, the Grand Hall is the ballroom scene. So there are tons of characters in this scene. I mean, I did not notice the drunk ghost passed out under the table until I was in my 20s. And I've been going to Disneyland since 1988 is the first time I went. 87, 88. And I did not notice that until I was an adult. But we have the organist who is playing on the far end of the room and was my personal nightmare as a child from a coffee table book my parents had. I would flip through that page so fast. I don't know why, but it just haunted me. And the organ he's playing is from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which is pretty cool. We have our birthday party happening in the center of the room. We have the drunk under the table. We have the duelers, which in recent years, I have heard a rumor that people say it is Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. I do not believe this, but I think it's kind of a funny thing that people have decided that's who it is. We have all of our ballroom dancers. And then, fun fact, the chandelier swinging ghost actually has a name. The Imagineers gave him a name, and it is Pickwick. And if you look, he's actually dressed like he would be in a Charles Dickens novel. Other than Leota, he is the only named character on the ride, which we'll get to a little bit more later about the names. And then, of course, there's probably a billion more that you have to look every time you ride the ride. You see something new in that scene.
So I don't know if this is recent canon that this has been added, or if I heard that this has been added, or maybe it's just somebody making up their own headcanon. But I heard the gentleman with the crown at the table was Jean Lafitte. Have you heard that?
I've never heard that. I've not heard that at all.
Okay, so we're going to have to do some research into this,
Yes.
if it is actually true, if they added that storyline, if not. Like Sarah mentioned with cast members making up their own stories for the stretching room portraits, a lot of this stuff is not written in stone canon. A lot of it is fan created, cast member created, and we don't really know everything about what is the actual intended story, and sometimes that evolves over time as well.
Correct, yeah.
But that is not Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton in this head anyway. In this brain, that ain't them.
Hamilton did not shoot at Burr, so they shoot at each other, and so that does not fit. But nice try. You know what? It's your head story of what is happening in that room. So if you want it to be Burr and Hamilton, you do you, boo. Okay, so we've gone through our actually quite a bit shorter room than we thought. As Rick said in the last episode, we talked about this room. I thought this room went on forever when I was a kid. And as an adult, I'm like, man, that went through so fast. I could take more of those dancing ghosts any day. So now we're going to move into the attic, where we meet Constance Hatchaway, who did not have a name or a backstory that was this detailed until 2006. At the Disneyland Resort, and 2007 in Walt Disney World. So that's actually a lot more recent than I think a lot of people realize. Before that was just called The Bride, and her image, if you've ridden this ride over the years, her image has changed so many times. She's looked completely different over the years. She's currently voiced by Kat Cressida, which every time I hear that name, I think of the Hunger Games. It's a total Hunger Games name. So her story, which is canon, I should say, that Disney has actually officially announced, so it's canon, is she was married 5 times. She murdered her husband, all 5 of them. And the last one is actually based on the portrait in the stretching room, and that is George. So he is the final groom. His original name was George Pete Cleaver. Like, I know you remember earlier when I was talking about the woman sitting on the grave, but then they found this doesn't work because Constance's last name isn't Pete Cleaver. It was something else. So that ended up completely changing, and George has a new last name.
Now, come on. It could just be that Constance was like a real feminist who was just like, I'm not going to take my husband's name. Like, that's crazy. If she's already killing them, why would she be taking their names?
I'm flipping back in my notes. So the reason why it can't be Pete Cleaver is because the woman whose name was Pete Cleaver was Abigail. And that is the original name of the woman on the stone is Abigail Pete Cleaver. So they can't name him George Pete Cleaver and expect it to be, because now Constance is supposed to be the one sitting on the stone as she's dying of old age and has lost her husband, right? So yeah, somebody messed up along the way.
What? Disney made a mistake?
She could be a feminist all she wants. Maybe Hatchaway is her.
I mean, she's killed 5 husbands. I think she has some feminist cred there.
You know, that's fair. The Black Widow Bride, I think, is one of the nicknames that they had for her in one of the books I was reading. And I'm like, that is fair. So now we talk about dun dun dun, the Hatbox Ghost. The one that will be coming to Walt Disney World. Very exciting. Very exciting.
I am so excited for Hatbox Ghost coming to Walt Disney
It's such
World.
a good one.
I know there are a lot of people who want to keep everything different between Disneyland and Walt Disney World, so you have a reason to go to both. But you're not going to fly all the way from the East Coast to Anaheim just to see Hatbox Ghost. That's nobody's sole reason for going to Disneyland. So I say, bring him to Walt Disney World. It would be so cool to be able to see him here. There's a space for him every time you go through the attic scene, and you're like, he could sit right there. Right there.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, he's a good one. And the thing is, I could understand people who rushed to Disneyland when he did reappear, because it was a big mystery about where did the Hatbox Ghost go? Where is he? Was he too scary? Was it this? Was it that? You know what? It wasn't nearly that exciting. You know why? They couldn't get the trick to work. That's the sole reason the Hatbox Ghost disappeared for so long. Now they brought him back, and he's freaking terrifying. He is so scary. Very cool, very scary. Came back for the 60th anniversary in 2015 and has never left the attic since. So sad when the illusion didn't work. But you know what? The story that he's too scary, things like that, I'd say nowadays he's too scary than he was back then. Shoot. Now we move on, and are we pushed? Do we fall? Did we trip? We fall out of the attic window somehow, and we end up in the graveyard. The characters we meet here are many, 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 so I did not list them because you can go through yourself and see everybody. But the few that we do know and love are the caretaker and the dog, which surprisingly don't have official names, which I kind of wish they did, but they don't. We have our pop-up ghosts, which is kind of fun because they seem like kitschy carnival type props, but they are an original idea from Raleigh and Gracie when they were creating the ride, that they wanted these as a scare, so they kept that in. The whole graveyard scene, especially as you round the first big corner in, you start to see a lot of forced perspective, which we see a lot of in all of Disneyland, to give you a lot more depth to the graveyard. And of course, we have our singing busts who have some names. We have Rollo Rumpkin, Uncle Theodore, which is the one is most well known because he is voiced by Thurl Ravenscroft, who, as you may know, he also does the song "You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch," and of course worked on some other Disney attractions as well. We have Cousin Algernon, Ned Nub, and Phineas P. Pock. I don't know who is who, so if you want to know that, you should Google it.
And a rumor that is not true: Walt Disney does not play any of those busts. But people have started this rumor that it's Walt Disney playing that character, and it just is not
just looks similar.
Walt Disney. No, there were a lot of guys with cheesy mustaches in the 60s.
That's great. One thing I do like about these busts is their nickname is the Phantom Five, which I think is kind of cool. I was like, that makes they're a good bust boy band. Very nice. Very nice. One kind of a funny story that I have to talk about on this, because I forgot to when we talked about this scene earlier on the last episode. So when I was a teenager, I was riding this ride, and I had never seen the Grim Reaper like ghost thing in the graveyard scene hiding. It's towards the end, and it's hiding in a mausoleum. And the whole rest of my time there, I was there for a youth convention across the street. And the whole time I thought I was going to die because I saw this, and I didn't think anybody else could see it. There was seriously something wrong with me. I was terrified. So it was maybe 4 years later, I went back and it was still there. And I turned to my husband and I'm like, I swear, I thought I was the only person who could see that.
And he married you anyway.
I know. I even asked the people I was with, I'm like, did you guys see that one part? And I don't know if maybe they just weren't looking in that direction when it happened. It goes by so quickly. And they were like, no, we didn't see it. Oh my gosh. I literally thought I was going to die because I saw. Okay. Okay, back to okay. So that's the graveyard. We go through the graveyard. Pretty cool. Great music. This is where the tension's really building, and then you end up in the crypt, and this is where we end up with our friends, the hitchhiking ghosts. And when I talked earlier about only 2 characters having real names in the whole ride, besides I guess 2 side characters, so Leota and the other one I mentioned that now I can't remember because I'm looking at my notes. Pickwick. Thank you. Yes, Pickwick and Leota. The hitchhiking ghosts canon do not have names. It was not until recently when they started putting them on Funko Pops and on other merchandise, they had names, but these names were actually thought of by guests and over the years from guests and from cast members who nicknamed them these things. So ultimately their names are Ezra, who is tall, skinny, Gus, who is our short, long-bearded friend, and Phineas, who is our larger ghost with the top hat. So Ezra, Gus, and Phineas are our hitchhiking friends. Fun fact, Ezra is made out of the same mold as the Hatbox ghost. So if you look at them, you'll notice they're the same shape.
So Sarah, I have a quick question. What is your favorite of the hitchhiking ghosts?
I like Gus, the little short one with the long beard. He's so cute.
So according to you, Gus is better than Ezra. That is a joke that is only going to appeal to old people. I think it's even too old for you, Sarah. But there was
I have no idea what you're talking about.
There was a 90s alternative band called Better Than Ezra, and I wanted to bring that up, but obviously it was just a dumb joke.
Now that you've mentioned it, I get it.
Right. I actually have a friend, and her name is coincidentally Sarah, and she has 2 kids, and one of them is Ezra. And every time on Facebook she puts that one of her kids did something well, or if Ezra was bad that day, I said, oh, then the other one was better than Ezra. And I think it's funny every time, but it's not, so continue. I apologize.
That's funny. Now that you've explained it, it's way funnier because at first I was like, I don't understand. Who's Gus and Ezra? Like, I don't know. Okay.
All good jokes are better when you explain them, obviously.
Of course. Okay, so now we are coming to the end of our ride through the Haunted Mansion. And we are at the exit where we see our friend Little Leota, whose name is not Little Leota. Surprise! Her name is actually Ghostess. The name Little Leota came from cast members and from guests because she's voiced and portrayed in face by Leota Toombs, the same woman who is the face for our dear friend Leota. So that's kind of a fun thing. I didn't realize. I could never figure out for years and years. I've never figured out why everybody called her Little Leota. I'm like, she's the bride. Like, what is going on? Well, now I understand it. And yeah, so she's the ghostess because she's like a ghost hostess. And I'm like, that makes more sense to me. So the ghostess, Little Leota, is our last little friend we see on the way. And then as you exit at Disneyland and you come out, this is where you can get a sneak peek at the animal cemetery, the pet cemetery. It's hidden. It's tucked way back. You do need to step out of the way. Please step out of the way or you're going to get mowed down by people on the moving sidewalk. And you can kind of see what is in there. In Walt Disney World, it is quite a bit different because their queue is different. And I believe yours exits out into a mausoleum, right?
You are correct. And in the pet cemetery at Walt Disney World, because they had gotten rid of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride for Winnie the Pooh in Fantasyland at Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World, Thaddeus J. Toad himself is represented in the Haunted Mansion Pet Cemetery at Walt Disney World. Definitely something I wanted to bring up because I pay my respects to Thaddeus J. Toad every time I walk off the Haunted Mansion.
Oh, that's funny. I love it. So as you can tell from my mini history and our walkthrough and character introductions, I did not talk about any of the other Haunted Mansions because that would take forever. We need a show for everyone, I swear. But in case you're curious, Walt Disney World had their Haunted Mansion is in Liberty Square. In Disneyland Resort, New Orleans Square. If you're in Tokyo, it is called the Haunted Mansion as well, and it is in Fantasyland. Paris, it's called Phantom Manor, and you will find it in Frontierland. And in my opinion, we need to do like 2 shows on this because it has the most cohesive storyline. It ties into everything, and it's so cool. And then lastly is Hong Kong, and they have Mystic Manor, which resides in Mystic Point. So yes, that was my little mini history and tour of the Haunted Mansion for you for Dia de los Muertos, which is when this will probably be running instead of Halloween.
Well, we ended up doing 3 whole episodes on the Haunted Mansion. The first episode aired before Halloween, and that was the poll questions. And then this history has ended up stretching through 2. It's like the stretching room. It's stretched through 2 complete episodes.
3 feet to 8 feet.
This is just Sarah's way of trying to monopolize the mic after Marissa spent so much time talking about D23, and Sarah was like, no, the people are going to forget about me. So she came armed with a lot of information. It's a little funny because sometimes my mother obviously listens to the show because her son hosts it, so she has to listen to it. But she will joke that when Marissa's on, it's like she's teaching a class. And my mom's like, I feel like I have to take notes. But today, Sarah is like going through this notepad and like, now students, and now we're going to move on to this section. So please, this will be on the test.
So, before we leave, I do want to say if anybody is interested in any of where I got my research from, the 2 books that I used mostly were The Haunted Mansion, Imagineering a Disney Classic by Jason Sorrell, and The Unauthorized Story of Walt Disney's Haunted Mansion by Jeff, is it Baham? Baum? Baham. This is his 50th anniversary edition. It's pretty cool. He's the founder of doombuggies.com, if you've been there. I also used a ton of different websites, but those are the 2 books. Get them on Amazon. They're amazing.
And I just wanted to throw in one other little piece of Walt Disney World Haunted Mansion trivia, and that's when you're in the queue. There's a lot to do in the Haunted Mansion queue in Walt Disney World. It's a lot more extensive of a queue. But one thing you might miss is the bride actually threw her wedding ring out the window, and you can see her wedding ring is stuck in the concrete. It used to be right behind a trash can, but they don't use that section of the queue as much anymore. So they have moved the trash can, at least the last time I rode the ride. So you can just kind of see it right before they're loading you into the actual building, right before you get into the point where they tell you to fill in all the available space before the door opens. It's right there on the side.
Oh, interesting. For some reason, I thought it was way further out. I've never looked for it myself, but for some reason, I thought it was way further out before you even entered the queue. So that's pretty cool that it's, I have to look for that next time I'm there.
Sarah, you brought a sword to a knife fight today. So you came armed with a ton of information. And a couple minutes before, maybe a few hours before we recorded, Sarah texted me, I'm going to cry. Like half of my information was deleted from my iPhone, and I can't imagine how much information you had before this. So thank you. The last 3 episodes have been so entertaining, so educational. We always love having you on the show.
Thank you. I was so happy I got to participate in this one.
We have a lot of great stuff coming up on the podcast and the YouTube channel in the next few weeks and months. My favorite episodes are when Sarah, Marissa, and I are all on the show at the same time. That's going to be happening a lot in the coming weeks as we engage in Disney and Harry Potter trivia. These are always fun episodes for bragging rights. Next week really kicks off the holiday season because November 17th is the Star Wars Holiday of Life Day. Of course, I snagged a park pass reservation for Disney's Hollywood Studios, and I made a reservation for Oga's Cantina. I'll do my best to bring you any special Life Day festivities on the YouTube channel. If anything really exciting happens beyond just special merchandise, I'll also talk about it on the podcast. I also have tickets for Busch Gardens, an after-hours event at Disney's Hollywood Studios, 3 different Run Disney events at Walt Disney World, and I already have locked down my Park Pass reservation for the 25th anniversary of Disney's Animal Kingdom on Earth Day of 2023. In addition to all of those things, Fantasmic has returned to Disney's Hollywood Studios. The holiday decorations are either up or are going up all over Walt Disney World Resort. Epcot's International Festival of the Holidays is getting started soon. At the beginning of the new year, Epcot will flip things over to the International Festival of the Arts, and there's so much more happening in the parks that I will be covering. We are also currently talking about different ways we could possibly celebrate our upcoming 100th episode of the podcast. Make sure you are subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube page to be up to date on everything happening with the channel. We are here to have a lot of fun, build a positive community, and not take ourselves too seriously in the process. Hopefully we inform and entertain, but our main goal is to make everybody feel comfortable sharing in these things with us. Join us next Thursday when I will welcome Steven from the YouTube channel A Life in the Parks. We'll be talking about his recent trip from the United Kingdom to Disneyland. As travel resumes, I love to hear stories about coming from overseas to visit the parks. Until then, have a great week.